See how magic I am? See, I say things and they happen. If I could just have that happen with my spouse and with my children and my animals, it would all be good if life was only so that easy. Um, right. So it's a privilege to speak to you all. And as Michelle said, I have been doing this working pretty exclusively with families impacted by dementia for a little over 15 years now. And I started working with family caregivers, really, spouses and largely adult daughters who were caring for someone. And through that work, I started working more and more closely with people who were living with changes, and especially as people were getting diagnosed earlier and earlier, and able to really engage in kind of the trajectory of their own experience. And so I come with this from a pretty wide background of experience. As Michelle said, I'm an occupational therapist, and so I've worked with people in their homes, in the hospital, in skilled nursing facilities, and in rehab facilities. So it's really quite a gamut of experience that I've had working with families, kind of really across the whole spectrum of these are progressive diseases, and so I've worked with people kind of along that whole continuum, as well as with people with different types of dementia, whether it's Alzheimer's or frontal temporal dementia. And one of the things that we say in this business is that if you've met one person with dementia, you've met one person. And even though you may have the same label, so much of your experience is dependent upon your life situation and who you are as a person and your body and your brain. And so there really are significant individual differences for everyone, and we just want to honor that. So tonight we're going to be talking about a few things. I thought we would talk about some of the common emotions that people actually experience when they've been diagnosed. We could talk a little bit about what's actually happening in people's brains, and what are the symptoms of dementia and how do they show up and why are they different for different people. I'm going to talk about what it's like to go through this adjustment process of getting a diagnosis, and then some next steps. And even though this is kind of outlaid here as a circle, I expect that we're going to be kind of going in and out of all of these different topics, over the course of the evening. And I want to share with you a few resources that I think are just excellent. In doing a talk like this about being newly diagnosed, I really prefer to do that with someone who's living with Alzheimer's or dementia, so that they can speak about their experience. And in the absence of that tonight, I'm going to give you kind of the resources that I'm drawing from that have been co-written by people living with dementia and their family members. And so I think these are really excellent resources for you, and they are all free. And I think Olivia is going to put some links for you in the chat so that you can access these materials on your own. The first group of materials are called the By Us, For Us guides. And these are little pamphlets. We've got a couple hard copies of them. And like I said, you can download them. These come from the Research Institute on Aging in Waterloo, Canada, the Murray Alzheimer's Research Education Program. And they have just been doing tremendous work for a long time. They're actually, I think, ahead of us in Canada in really working with people who are in the early stages and helping them to articulate their experiences in very helpful ways. So these guides are a terrific resource for you. And the second guide, this is a large manual that was created, in 2022 by Dementia Action Alliance, and they pulled together about 50 people to share, both professionals, family care partners, and people living with dementia, to all share kind of their experiences and what would be helpful. And so this is really a manual about living well with dementia. So it's called Pathways to Wellbeing. It's a manual of help hope, and inspiration. This one you can download, it's over 400 pages, or you can purchase a hard copy, I think for about maybe $25, and they'll send you a copy, but both excellent, excellent resources available to you. So I want to start tonight just with recognizing the reality of getting a diagnosis and living with someone who has a diagnosis, or being in a relationship with someone, or being related to someone. We can't underestimate the experience of grief and loss that actually goes with this, getting this diagnosis. And so I feel like I would be doing a disservice if we just jumped right in to talking about, here's the plaques and the tangles and the memory changes, because this is it's a big deal to get a diagnosis of Alzheimer's or dementia. And the grief is real and the loss is real. And in my experience and what I've learned from people, is that kind of the key to being able to move through the diagnosis is being able to learn how to live with the grief and loss that comes with the diagnosis. Grief is actually an emotion that is a natural reaction to loss. And grief comes out in a variety of different ways, depending on the individual. It's natural. It's a natural human experience that we all feel with loss. And while most people associate kind of loss and grief with death and dying, for people living with dementia and care partners, the loss and grief is actually a significant part of life, and it's ongoing. People living with dementia experience a continual losses over time. The loss of abilities, loss of employment, loss of meaningful relationships and activities, and I'm sure you can all add into that list. And care partners, and I'm using that word care partner, family member, spouse, adult child, anybody who is related to or in relationship with the person who is diagnosed or living with changes. That's what we refer to as a partner, a care partner. So that's how I'm using that terminology. But care partners can experience loss on on different levels. They can experience a loss of connection with their person as the person's abilities change. The who they are and the way that they've related in the past can also change. If dementia, dementia often comes in at a time when people are just stepping into a new phase of retirement or older adult living, where there are plans, and those can become dismantled or completely changed now that Alzheimer's or dementia comes into the picture. And then there's also the anticipation of the long-term loss, recognizing that this is a chronic and fatal disease ultimately, and so that death component will come. But the grief and the loss is somewhat unique because it starts at the beginning and it carries on. There are some common emotions that are associated with grief that you can see here, and I'm sure if you're honest with yourself, you've probably all experienced some level of these. Elizabeth Kubler-Ross was kind of the person who really did the first significant work in understanding grief, and she talked about kind of these different emotional states. And we know now that they aren't linear. You don't, start necessarily in denial and then move to anger and et cetera, but that you can have any one of these emotions at any given time kind of along the trajectory. And so the experience of shock or denial that, I can't possibly have dementia, it must be something else, or just not wanting to recognize dementia, not even being able to talk about it. There's, anger and frustration is typical. I'm so angry, that I've actually got this. Like, how could this happen to me now? I've taken care of myself all my life, and, why do I don't deserve this. Fear of the unknown, what's my life going to be like now? What's going to happen to fill in the blank? Experiences of sadness and loss, the anxiety that comes with the unknown, the overwhelming feeling that comes with the unknown, a sense of powerlessness, feeling like there's nothing you can do. People will oftentimes kind of internalize that powerlessness and feel like they can't actually contribute anymore, or they don't have any usefulness anymore because they're not the same necessarily. They don't necessarily have the same abilities that they've had historically. A sense of isolation and loneliness can come in because of feelings like that people don't understand what I'm going through. They can't know what I'm going through. They can't experience this. And for some people, there's even a sense of relief, especially if it's been kind of a long diagnostic process. I mean, people oftentimes they know that something is wrong, and they can't kind of get it pinpointed. People share all the time about feeling like people don't necessarily believe them when they're talking about the experiences, or they'll minimize people's experience of saying like, oh, you're fine, or, we all have memory challenges, or we all forget this or that. And so that a phrase that has been coined by one of the folks that's in several of our groups, his name's Michael, and he's given us permission to share his name. He talks about the diminution of self, this feeling of lessening that that he experiences because people don't believe him or treat him like he's crazy. And so the sense of relief that actually comes in being able to name, to at least know what it is that's going on. So all of those emotions are within the realm of what's common and typical for people. And like I said, you may experience some more than others, but I want to just kind of put it out there that this is kind of the common experience. And so if you see yourself in these words and in these feelings, I want you to know that you're not alone, that this is common territory for where you are and what you're going through. One of this graphic that you see here, this is one of those guides that have been created by the group from Canada, the Bias Forest Guides. And this one's called Living and Transforming with Loss and Grief. And it's about a little 15-page, 20-page pamphlet. And this guide, actually, it's part of their partnership series. So it's written by both people living with dementia and their care partners. So you get both perspectives kind of in this guide of what it's like to be in this experience of loss and grief, and then to transform in that experience, hopefully into a place of hope. And so in this section of the book, they talk about the impact that dementia has on all these different domains. It definitely has emotional impact, but people can experience loss and grief in physical ways, physical pain, feeling, hollow kind of inside, having sleep disturbances, headaches, weight gain or weight loss, dehydration, all of the, there are physical ways that grief and loss manifest in ourselves and in our friends and people who are impacted. Psychologically, which is slightly different, we have the emotional response, but then there's also kind of this psychological impact that these can have, things like that sense of feeling like, I'm inadequate, either as I'm inadequate now because I'm living with cognitive changes and that I can't do the things that I used to be able to do. And also a sense of inadequacy of, wow, I'm now a partner with someone who's living with cognitive changes, and I have no idea what that means or how to be helpful or how to be supportive. Recognizing that there's another psychological impact is kind of the loss of independence and loss of autonomy, and the kind of the role changes that go with that. I talked about that, there's a sense of inadequacy and then also a sense of incapacity. I'm not able to do it, and or I don't have the skills to do it, or whatever I do isn't enough. That both of those feelings can happen, and having just a kind of a loss of a sense of pride in it, especially, if somebody's been really proud of the work that they've done all their lives and they aren't able to continue to do that kind of work. That's has a real psychological bearing on people. The financial impacts are great, as I'm sure several of you are probably already experiencing, especially as people need more help and you need additional resources in place. And then I think the social impact also is something that I want to highlight, because it tends to get a little bit of a not sure it's fully talked about or understood. And the social impact, we obviously have, we think about being isolated from friends, and the stigma that surrounds these diseases keeps people at arm's length, or that our external relationships change for sure. But I think there's also significant changes, between spouses or between partners, as communication, typical patterns of communication, where you may have talked through everything before, and now suddenly you have this third, it's like almost like a third person in the room in your relationship. And so, both sides, both people can kind of be thinking like, oh, well, do I say this or do I not say this? If I say this, how is it going to be interpreted? So relationship dynamics now begin to change because of the presence of dementia. And so isolation can happen on both sides. Intimacy can definitely change across the spectrum. Roles begin to change and shift. You could have somebody who was always the whatever in the household, and now somebody was always, like in my household, I manage all the finances, and if I started to have cognitive changes, my husband would have to step into that space, and that would be completely unfamiliar territory for him. And I would probably be frustrated, because knowing that he doesn't have the capacity to do it, even though he wouldn't be living with cognitive changes. And so those role changes can be problematic. And just, I think on the whole, as intimacy changes, as relationships changes, as brain function changes, our loss of physical contact changes over time. And so all of those factors come into play. And again, the reason why I bring all these things up is because I'm hoping that by doing it, by talking about these things, that you can see yourself, and in kind of some of the things that I'm talking about, that these are common experiences for you. And I want you to see and to hear and to feel that commonality again, because your experience isn't unique if you find yourself in any of these places, and there is hope for you. And especially as you begin to meet other people who have shared experience, and you learn and hear how they've they have moved forward in transforming their experiences of loss and grief. Not that they don't go away, but I think your capacity to live with them improves over time. So this is just a little bit of these are just some screenshots of that booklet. So you can see a little bit about, kind of what they look like inside. And so here you can see some very kind of practical, tips for communicating. One of the decisions is who are you going to tell and how do you tell them and when do you tell them and to what degree do you tell them? And so here's some, tips and ideas about communicating your experience with other people. And then here you see, there's a section here where it talks about how do you shift to a positive outlook? How do you even get to that point where you can start to see, a positive experience? So clearly a diagnosis can be overwhelming, and not knowing where to turn for support can be extremely challenging. The grieving process doesn't necessarily have a time frame, and everybody grieves in their own way and at their own pace. And as I've said, that experience is ongoing throughout the process and may come through different eruptions over time. But your capacity to adjust and to take it in, I think, is what improves over time. And, thankfully, like I said, it's our privilege to be with you all in this, and hopefully you see us as Caring Kind as a resource to be able to help you through this process. And as I've said, being with others with similar experiences definitely creates an opportunity for you to be able to share what you're going through in an environment that feels safe and supportive, even though it may be, the sharing can be difficult. But hearing what others are experiencing, how they're coping, how they're adjusting, and how they're learning to live and eventually thrive, and what we would say is kind of coexisting with the diagnosis, is what we're hoping for. So I wanted to kind of just start with that and level set and just kind of honor that that's, often the elephant in the room. And so I think getting it out on the table is helpful. So I want to move into talking a little bit about some of the specifics about kind of what people experience in their diagnosis. But does anybody have a burning question or something that wasn't necessarily clear as I was speaking there? And if not, we'll keep
There's
going.
one question in chat. Oh, go ahead. Sorry.
Yeah, I'm trying to understand, going right back to the beginning when you were explaining what Caring Kind was all about, or at least the other person was. Are you interacting on a regular basis with the physicians that are managing this situation? In other words, my wife is under the care of a neurologist who specializes in memory issues. This particular neurologist recommended that we register with Caring Kind for this program, and we're glad that he did. So I'm wondering whether you refer back to him or go get back to him from time to time with your observations, as you, not necessarily you particularly, but the person who monitors the program, week to week, gets back to the neurologist in some formal or even informal way.
Right. So that's a great question. Thanks for asking it. And so basically at Caring Kind, we see ourselves and kind of the role that we play as a community-based organization in this work is we kind of work in tandem with and are kind of an extension of the medical community. And so there's certain things that they can do that we don't do. And there are things that we can take the time to do that they can't necessarily take the time to do. And so it's really a collaborative relationship. first let me say, we don't share information with anybody without your permission. And so your information is private with us. And having said that, I will say that the more you can encourage anyone who's working with your family to communicate with each other, the better it is for everyone. Because we all have different experiences and we see different things, and we are better as a team kind of working with you. And so what we do at Caring Kind is we work with a number of different health systems and referring partners who will make a direct referral to us as Caring Kind, which we follow up then with a conversation to figure out, to talk through a conversation, what is it that you're experiencing and what would be helpful? What is it that we offer or other people offer that would be helpful for your situation? When we get that kind of direct referral, we do report back to the whoever sent us the referral that we've been in touch with your person or not. And then if you give us permission to communicate with them, we're just in the process of kind of honing our reporting back to them, probably on a quarterly basis. We would say, hey, so-and-so is participating in these things with us. But we basically keep it at that surface level, unless, you're experiencing a challenge, or if you want us to kind of speak to your medical team on your behalf, we're happy to do that. But we let you kind of drive, you're in the driver's seat for how much information is actually shared.
Okay, so this confidentiality that you referred to applies to the medical professional that we're dealing with as well, unless we give you specific permission to do that?
Right, and we typically do. So when there's a referral form that comes back with us, we do ask them to they have to secure their information in order for them to make a referral to us. And on our referral form, we ask you to give us that so that we can, share that information back and forth. But I'm happy to talk to you about your specific situation. We could talk to you about, what information, if there's limits, what you'd like to share, or if you want us to have full access.
Yeah, I think that would be helpful, actually, because the doctors,
It generally is.
yeah, the doctor's been dealing with our situation for a few years, and is up to speed on all aspects of it. And so I think it would be good. Kind of a technical question. Will we be able to get copies of these slides that you're using?
Absolutely.
Thank you very much.
Sure. Kathleen, I see you're got your hand up.
I'm a close friend, future care partner of someone very recently diagnosed.
Mhm.
As someone looking on and seeing profound changes, yet the person themselves is in fairly substantial denial, what's a beneficial role for us in connection with dealing with that denial to get them the help that they need, but yet not stripping their optimism away?
I will tell you that the indirect approach is the best approach. And I think the most effective way to help people come to terms with what they're living with is to hear it from other people. And I think, I'm looking at Rochelle and Michelle and Olivia in the group, and all of us who have been in groups with people who may not have been necessarily talking about their diagnosis or have been in denial of their diagnosis, and kind of through some of the programs that we do, particularly the program we have called Cognitive Stimulation Therapy, which is really about enhancing your thinking capacities. You're not in that group talking about, it's not a support group about living with Alzheimer's. It's about how do we make sure that our brains are functioning at their highest level possible. And over the course of that 8 weeks, twice a week for 8 weeks, other people in the group do start to share about the fact that they have a diagnosis and what that means for them. And over time, as those relationships build, people become more aware, I think, self-aware of what they are living with, and feel they open up about coming to an acceptance of that themselves. So again, we could talk more specifically about that, but I think that 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 is not, you know, I've been in this business, like I said, where I am now is not where I started. I used to think, you know, oh, I'm teacher, educator, you know, we're going to work with people, etc. No. But having people, other people who are living with it, they are the best teachers for one another and the best support for one another. We're really kind of the ancillary support. So the more we can match make people to get connected together, I think the better off they will ultimately, you know, there's real magic that happens there for the person who's living with it.
Thank you very much.
Yeah. So let's talk a little bit about kind of about what dementia actually looks like. And I'm not going to go into great detail here with you all, but just to kind of put us all on the same plane. So dementia is an umbrella term, like cancer is an umbrella term. And it's actually an umbrella term for a number of different symptoms, like memory loss, confusion, apathy, and those symptoms, when they get significant enough and are in the right clusters, then that means that there is actually an underlying brain process that is causing those symptoms. And so it's a general term. Dementia is a general term that describes a whole category of conditions that are in some way or another causing a deterioration in the brain. And the changes then that occur are significant enough that they impact a person's daily activities and their relationships. But it's an umbrella term like cancer. And so then there are different types of cancers, there are different types of these conditions that are under that umbrella. And so Alzheimer's disease is typically the most common one that you hear about. But it's Alzheimer's disease is a dementia. I think another way to think about this is, is like fruits. So fruits is the category, and there are different types of fruits. There's apples, there's pears, there's grapes, or vegetables. There's different types of vegetables, but the higher level is the category. So dementia is equivalent to fruits or vegetables from a category standpoint, and then there's specific types. And this is actually a picture of a healthy human brain. This is the left side of the brain. This is the front part of the brain over here on the left side of your screen, and this is the back part of the brain over here. This is the side part that's by your ear, and this ear kind of hangs underneath the brain. And I show you this because it looks like kind of a convoluted, crazy, squiggly, the brain looks confused itself, by its configuration. It's not nice and neat and square with lines, right? It's these curves and grooves and what we call fissures and things. But in fact, the brain is completely organized. And we know all of these different colors that you see here, we know basically what happens in each sections of the brain to very specific areas and territories, because there are these different parts correlate to different actions, different brain actions. And so, for example, this yellow little strip right here, all of your motor functions. So, and you move your arms, your legs, all of that is mapped out very specifically right here in this section. Here's another picture of it here. So you see all these colored areas here. All of these areas, we know what all of those specific areas do. And this picture on the left here is a comparison between somebody who has Alzheimer's disease, which is a type of dementia, and someone who has frontotemporal dementia. And you can see with the Alzheimer's disease, It's mostly in this side area here, right? You see this green and especially this light green area, that's where memory is. Whereas in frontal temporal, it's on the side here, but you see how much more is the front of the brain is impacted by frontal temporal dementia. And I show you this because depending on where the disease is actually impacting the brain, that's when you see different types of what we call symptoms for people, right? So I'm sure you've all probably seen someone who's had a stroke, or you've heard someone talk who's had a stroke, and sometimes their words don't come out, or they can't speak. That's because the area of the brain that controls their mouth and the words coming out, there's been a little stroke in that part of the brain. So another part of their brain, their thinking abilities, that would work just fine because there's no problem in that area. But so where the brain is having a problem, we're going to see that in people's the changes of their abilities and their symptoms, especially in the earlier stages, or the earlier phases. And so as people, the longer they have dementia and symptoms progress, they might look similar, but at least in the beginning phases, it depends on where their brain is impacted. And that becomes important because we're going to talk in a little while about how do you identify how to best support someone? And that has to do with learning what their strengths are. And what their strengths are is going to be related to which part of the brain is working the best. And how do we compensate for the areas where their brains are having challenges? So this is just kind of a quick look at what am I talking about here? So with Alzheimer's disease kind of over time, it's kind of like an escalator. It's kind of you see a slow kind of steady progression in people's abilities. Whereas someone who has vascular dementia, that's more like a staircase where they're kind of going along, and then there's, person might experience a little mini stroke in an area of the brain, and then they would have a dip in their lewy and then kind of go along there until there's another mini stroke somewhere else, and then you would see a change there. Lewy body disease is, these are different proteins in the brain, and people who have Lewy body disease tend to have kind of good days and bad days. And so that's a little bit like a roller coaster. People with frontotemporal degeneration, so that's the front part of the brain, the frontal part. That there's kind of two types of frontotemporal. One affects people's behaviors and kind of their impulses and their social abilities. And the other one is more language-based. And so depending on, again, where the brain is impacted, you could see someone who may suddenly be acting out of the, not the same way that they've historically acted because that behavioral piece has been impacted, or someone can have language issues. People in the late stages of Parkinson's disease often have dementia symptoms, and Parkinson's disease is actually related to Lewy body. So the Lewy bodies are what cause the Parkinsonian symptoms. Most people have a mixed version of kind of any one of these combinations, oftentimes Alzheimer's and vascular, or vascular and Alzheimer's. There's a type that's related to alcohol and substance use, and there are many more, but these are the primary ones.
Could I ask a question?
Mhm.
What role does a stroke play in driving these symptoms, or enhancing, or perhaps enhancing these symptoms?
What I will say is that the same risk factors, or the same reasons why people have a stroke, because they have high blood pressure, or they have plaque in their arteries, the same things that people have heart attacks and strokes kind of for the same bodily reasons. And your brain is actually, your head is connected to your body and your brain is connected to your body. So high blood pressure, high triglycerides, all of those cardiac factors also affect people's brains. And that's where the vascular dementia has correlations to those cardiac factors. If someone has a brain aneurysm or, that was a malfunction and that's the reason why they had a stroke, that's different. But if a person has a stroke because of their cardiac and their heart health history, then that's, can be related to kind of the small mini strokes. Okay.
But you're not suggesting a stroke could, quote unquote, could.
Right, so
Uh,
I'm not a medical doctor. I'm not a medical doctor. All I can say is that basically there are similar risk factors.
But you're not saying that a stroke could cause dementia.
A stroke will cause a problem in the area where the stroke and the brain, where that stroke has happened. That's not necessarily the same thing as vascular dementia. They could be related, but one is not necessarily the same as the other. And we can talk more about that kind of, individually, okay? So even though that brain kind of looks like, it's a mess, like I said, you could see by all of the colors and how we know that it's coded. It's actually pretty well organized. But this is kind of what your brain is actually made up of, these special cells called neurons, and I won't go into those details, but I think this is an easier illustration that your brain is really like a massive highway system. And it's information is going from one place to another place through these roads. And these roads are all connected to each other. And when hopefully the traffic's not too bad and you can actually, the signals can get through where we want them to go. And what happens in Alzheimer's disease is that there are kind of two problems. One is you have these, you've probably heard of the plaques and the tangles. And so there are these clusters of proteins that are called plaques that kind of build up, like a massive big ball in the road or, a massive big, snow, during snow, it's like the signal can't get through. Signal can't get through because there's literally the plaques, there's the junk is in the way. That's one problem. The other problem is like, it's like the rebar, those wires that go through roads and bridges. That's like another one of the brain structures, and that's called the tau. And so the tau proteins will tangle and twist, and it's like the road literally breaks apart. So there's not junk in the road, but it breaks apart, and so the signal can't go through. And eventually those nerve cells then will die. And so we see brain changes then that happen in a number of different areas in different ways. And it, kind of here's, the list here. And so typically we see changes in Alzheimer's and memory function, executive function, which is a big terminology for kind of higher level thinking. If you think of an executive in a company, they're kind of the boss who's making sure that everything is happening as it should. Visual spatial function, which is a part of like how you actually see, language, processing speed, etc. So we hear about memory changes, especially short-term memory changes. Short-term memory is, I can't necessarily remember what I had for breakfast, but long-term memory often stays intact, often stays. And so people can remember things from their far past, but not necessarily from their recent past. People can have challenges with their language. This is, both of my parents have the word, not being able to get to the word that they want. It's in their head, but they can't actually pull it. And so they might pull a word that's similar. But language changes are pretty common. This is a list of kind of those executive function changes. And I'm not going to go through all of these because I think that we do deeper dives like this in our education. but these tend to be the ones that people in their early stages become most frustrated with, because it's things like being able to organize your thoughts and plan, and things that have just been a normal part of how we live as adults. Being able to follow a story in a movie, or being able to think through a problem. Those are the pieces of the frontal part of the brain that become challenging and are incredibly frustrating, because they're the things that are easy for us to do and that we rely on as adults. And yet they become, that's where people experience problems. But there are other things that are changing beyond memory as well. And so the vision is actually a very important one. So, you're looking at me, I'm wearing glasses, right? That's correcting what's happening in my eyeball. But what I see is actually happening in my brain. So the information is going in my eyes, it's going upside down, it's inverted, it's pieced back together in the back of my brain. And that part of the brain can be challenging. And so even though my eyeballs might be working fine, my brain vision isn't working necessarily correctly. And so, we see this oftentimes when I was working with people in home care. People who are driving may have a hard time, they may start to get into fender benders because they're misjudging how far away, the next car is, or backing into something. So that where things are in relationship to space, people will fall because they misjudged how far down the step was, or walking off the curb, or not realizing that was where it was, or kind of missing a chair because they misjudged how far the chair was away from them. Processing speed, this is another one that's important, because processing speed is how quickly can you understand what I'm saying to you. And I'm saying quite a few things to you all in a short period of time. And if you're living with dementia, you actually may be just registering now what I was talking about with vision. But I've moved on to talk about the speed of processing. So the pace in which the brain is able to take in information, work with it, consolidate it, that can change over time. That can change with dementia. And so slowing down, saying less, pausing, making sure that we're on the same sync is where communication begins to have challenges. And how you can actually improve your communication is just by slowing down. But that affects things also like, driving or being out anywhere where there's kind of quick things that are happening, being able to process those. And then things like coordination and balance and people's physical abilities, their, being able to taste, being able to smell, feeling hot, cold, all of those things are actually controlled in your brain. And so any one of those can be impacted by dementia. I put this slide up here. So this is Richard Taylor over here in the purple shirt, and Kate Swaffer. And these are two of kind of the people two people living with Alzheimer's disease, who started off kind of early in their experience, really advocating and being public about their experience. And Richard Taylor was a psychologist from Texas. He actually died of cancer a few years ago. But he's written a book, which I'll show you a picture of here. He had a very, very insightful experience. He could articulate very well what was going on with him. And Richard he said this: "I'm not dying from a disease, I'm living with a chronic cognitive disability." And Kate Swaffer, who is Australian, she was diagnosed in her 50s and she's still, I think approaching maybe 15 years now, she's been living with Alzheimer's. She talks about a key, sorry, I keep doing that, I apologize. A key issue in this field is that we need care that's based on a social and disabilities pathway. That we need to see dementia as a disability, as for people who have Alzheimer's disease, they're living with a cognitive disability for a long period of time, especially if somebody's diagnosed early. And so the more that we can think about how to support them, like we support other people with disabilities, the better their, the better the better their quality of life will be, your quality of life will be. So these are just a picture of some real leaders and kind of public figures who have talked about and are sharing about their experience living with Alzheimer's and various dementias. And there are several books that have been written by people living with Alzheimer's and dementia about their experience. This is Richard Taylor's here. Greg O'Brien was, he was a journalist. This is a recent one. And so Christine Bryden, she was one of the first people who did this. And this book here, Nothing About Us Without Us, 20 Years of Dementia Advocacy. This book is about 10 years old now. So people have really been, people with, living with dementia and Alzheimer's have been advocating for a different way of viewing and supporting them for a number of years. And I think what's helpful and what people have told me is helpful is, we started this conversation in recognizing this experience of grief and loss and the emotions that are, quickly come to the surface. And how do we begin to think about moving from, being deeply in our grieving process to kind of transforming into a space where we can begin to think about living with this chronic disability. And so there's a great book. This is not about dementia here, but William Bridges has been really a leader in the field of talking about transitions for over 40 years. And this book kind of is very helpful in kind of understanding what transitions as a whole are like. And so Bridges says that because a transition is a process by which people unplug from an old world before living with dementia, in our case, and plug into a new world, we can say that the transition begins with an ending and finishes with the beginning. And he talks on about the 3 phases that are pretty typical for any transition. And I just want to highlight these for you. So here are the 3 phases. You can see the ending, the losing, the letting go phase, and then this neutral zone phase and kind of the new beginning. The ending, the losing, the letting go phase is the phase in which a person is letting go of the old ways and the old identity that people had. It's the first phase of the transition, and it begins with an ending and the time when you need to help people to deal with their losses. So this is that place of recognizing the loss, recognizing the grief, honoring that, because you have to kind of experience that in order to be able to move through it into the next phase, which is the neutral zone. And the neutral zone is the going through and the in-between time when the old situation is gone, but the new situation we're not fully there yet. We call this the neutral zone. It's when the critical psychological realignment and the repatterning takes place. So basically there's some work that's shifting in a person's brain at this point to say like, okay, my life as it was before Alzheimer's or my diagnosis, that is a chapter of my life. And now we're moving to the next chapter, which is the new beginning. And the new beginning is the phase when a person is coming out of the transition and is making a new beginning. This is when people develop their new identity of, who I am now, they experience a new energy and discover the new sense of purpose that makes the change begin to work. I think if you talk to anyone who is living well with dementia, they will all talk about purpose and how purpose drives them every day in very practical and tangible ways. If we look at, talk to people who are living with disabilities, this is kind of just known, work that's been studied about people who are living with chronic illnesses and disabilities. You can see kind of these patterns, these shifts that happen in people over time, where they start in an experience of illness and they move towards an experience of wellness. People start in an experience of uncertainty, and then they can move into a space of where they feel like they're regaining some semblance of themselves. Or people who are living with an illness start it with this experience of living in an illness and move towards living life. And so this idea of moving towards life with a chronic disability is, again, kind of the space where these pioneers and leaders who've been living with dementia have really been talking about, this is what our experience is. And, these are just some advocacy resources that have been pushed forward there. So Richard, in his book, he has this quote, he says, "I'm not half full, I'm not half empty, I'm a whole person, and I will continue to be a whole person until I draw my last breath." That isn't typically the type of language that people who are recently diagnosed feel, but I share this because these are Richard's words about someone who has been, who lived with Alzheimer's for a number of years. And we can look to, other people and other diseases, right? People have been living with disabilities and really, figuring out how to live with them. And so how do they do that? They focus on their strengths and their abilities and their well-being. And, that's kind of the work that we want to do with people, is to help them identify what are those strengths and abilities so that we can partner with people to get to a place where they're experiencing quality living and well-being for as long as they can. So, here, Ray Charles and Stevie Wonder were both had visual impairments their entire life, and yet we know their names, right? Because they figured out how to focus on their strengths and to live in spite of their disabilities. Michael J. Fox has done incredible work changing what it's like to live with Parkinson's disease and what's possible. Christopher Reeves was one of the first people, with a spinal cord injury who really championed a new reality for people. They've really been mentors for people who are living with disabilities. And so we want to think about in supporting people and Kathleen, this comes back to kind of your question early on, was, how do we support people? How do we identify their strengths and leverage their strengths and abilities and meet them where they are, wherever they are, kind of on the continuum? And so, these three pictures kind of represent, people in three different phases of Alzheimer's. In the beginning, in the early stages, we work with people to be as independent as possible for as long as possible, to be engaged in the things that are meaningful to them. And as their abilities change, then, we still want people to be engaged in things that are meaningful to them with a little bit of assistance. And as people's abilities change and they aren't able to engage themselves or to be independent in things, we want to bring them to, or make sure that, we're providing support to keep people engaged in things that are rich and meaningful and provide them with a quality of life. So I've got a little video here that I want to share with you from Brian Van Buren, who talks about what his life is like after diagnosis.
My My name is Brian Van Buren, and I am 68 years old, and I live in the wonderful city of Charlotte, North Carolina. I'm a retired flight attendant. By profession, I am a licensed neuropsychiatric therapist. I lost my partner 20 years ago, and I answered an ad in the newspaper looking for flight attendants, and I thought, oh, that would be fun to do for 1 year. Well, 20 years later, I never went back to practicing. Once I was diagnosed, I really went through a depression. I just felt like I had nothing else to do in my life, and I was basically just going to lay down and die. My identity had always been as a flight attendant. I was very proud of that. I loved going through the airport, dragging my bag along and wearing my uniform, and people would look at you like, wow, look what he's doing. I've always cooked. I learned from my father. By the time I was 7 years old, I was cooking dinner for the family. So I cook all kinds of food. I can cook Spanish, French, Thai, Vietnamese, and I love sharing my food with people. It's a great way of having conversation and a great way of connecting with people. Food is kind of the ingredient for that. I have traveled to 56 countries. I have been to 49 states. I love to travel, and I'm very spontaneous about it.
Brian is a wonderful example of thriving. He's teaching others. He's helping others. As they listen to him, they recognize, oh my God, he's doing what he loves to do, and he's doing it with passion and purpose.
Life definitely does not end at having Alzheimer's. I have friends who go skydiving and scuba diving and just do whatever you want to do. There's no limit except if you put a limit on yourself.
So that's Brian. And Brian's story is not unfamiliar to me. You know, I've met hundreds of people who are figuring out how to live well with their experience. I want to share with you another Bias Forest Guides, because this one is a very practical one on kind of tips and strategies. So how do we get there? How do we actually, begin on this journey of trying to improve well-being and quality of life, and understanding what people's strengths are and coping with the challenges that people have. And so this is a nice, helpful little booklet on tips and strategies. And this just kind of summarizes some of those ideas. And this is written by people living with dementia. So they say add in safeguards, things like putting your phone on the no call list, and putting limits on your bank accounts and your credit cards, so that to protect yourself from identity theft and those kinds of things. Working to minimize stress, so simplifying your daily routines, finding ways to manage stress, using visual aids and cues, to using things like checklists and post-it notes to help you to organize your daily activities. There are all kinds of technology tools that are out there and available now to support people in their daily life. Developing kind of consistent routines and habits, that's a useful thing to do because it sets you up for long-term success. Keep your sense of humor. That's definitely one that we hear over and over again. Planning, making kind of short-term plans and long-term plans, and that happens over time. One of the things that people share with us, Steve is a great advocate for how, oftentimes physicians will tell you get your affairs in order, and that's true. That's on the long-term plan. But for right now, kind of in the early stages, Steve says, I want to focus on today. I'm really, I want to make sure that I'm thinking about today. And, let's take, kind of slow and steady steps to get the long-term planning in place, but let's couple that with the planning for the now so that, my life is meaningful now. Communicating your needs, helping people to communicate their needs. If you're a care partner, at the end here, I'm gonna give you some questions that, you can use, opening dialogue to talk about what people's needs are. That may be unfamiliar territory with you, and that's also something that we can help with in some of the programs that we do. And then again, connecting to your peers, connecting to other people who have similar experience. A lot of people engage in research, and there's all kinds of ways that you can get engaged in research. There's research for clinical trials for new medications. There's research for new services and technology solutions that aren't necessarily drugs. And so all of those are kind of like, what's the leading edge of what might be helpful and useful for you? And so getting involved in research can be a very meaningful and rewarding thing. And then focusing on well-being, what matters the most? This tends to be something people talk about, is what are their priorities and what are the values and how do I want to spend my time now? Jerry Taylor, who I showed you at the beginning, the New York Times article, Jerry talks about how she has shelf life now. And so, she's always been, ever since she got diagnosed, she's been more thoughtful about how she wants to spend her time and what she's saying yes to and what she's saying no to. And so being able to think through, what are your values? What are your priorities? What is meaningful and brings you is what matter, what produces quality of life for you. And there are some good resources for this. So about 30 years ago now, there was a group called the Eden Alternative. They're still around. They began kind of fleshing out, what does quality of life look like with somebody who has Alzheimer's and dementia? And this work is, this kind of looks like Maslow's hierarchy of needs, if that rings a bell for any of you. But what this represents is this kind of pyramid, recognizing that people have, to feel really kind of safe and secure and known. People want to be recognized as people, that we have identity, that we need identity and connectedness. That really lays a foundation for all of us as human beings, and particularly for people living with dementia. And that when we have identity and connectedness, then we have a sense of security, and we can have as much autonomy as possible based on our abilities. And that allows us to get to this place where we're engaged in meaning and growth and joy. And I think that this pyramid, I don't know about you, but I think this pyramid, represents what I want from a quality of life standpoint. And so it doesn't really just relate to people who are living with Alzheimer's or dementia. The Merrick Group, they've done 2 other guides about quality of life. So this one here, role of health and well-being. This one's written for care partners or for family members about how do you actually support someone to be healthy and to experience well-being. And this one here is about how do we celebrate and live life now that we're diagnosed. So this particular publication came out of a research project with over 250 people living with dementia. And they talked about, now you have, you're living with this, how do you want to spend your time and what's meaningful to you? And they identified kind of these 7 categories for meaningful engagement or spending time, their leisure time. And so it had these core elements of feeling like I want to be me. So that's the identity piece. I want to be with people that are important to me and, in the places that are important to me. I want to have this balance of, I want to be as free as possible as I can be within my limitations. I want to have a balance of rest and play. I want to feel like I'm still making a difference and contributing in life. I want to continue to grow and develop as a human being, and I want to have fun. And so I think these for me provide a real roadmap for how do we support people to live well with dementia. Between this group and this slide here, this particular document, And that well-being pyramid, I think those give us very practical things to think about as we're supporting people. So meaningful engagement, there's a lot of ways people can be meaningfully involved, doing things that you love. You heard Brian talk about cooking, being involved, with the people that matter to us and that we love, picking up a new hobby, or picking up an old hobby, engaging in something creative. A lot of times the things that we did historically in work, the reason why we choose our professions for certain reasons. And if our professions are meaningful, they're meaningful because it does something inside of us. For me, I'm a problem solver. And so, so what do I do for leisure? I do home improvement. I do home renovation because I'm always, trying to make things better. Well, that's kind of who I am as a person. My husband is a poet. And, for him, his creative thing, he's the gardener, he's out there thinking about the colors and the butterflies and, how it all works together with the beautiful music in the background. And he didn't start off being a gardener, but that's a passion that he's, developed over time. And so there might be, something new that somebody's never done. We see this a lot with, people who've never been involved in music or painting or the arts who now find a new outlet in those areas. Staying connected with friends. This is a group of people who are sharing a part of our To Whom They May Concern performance where they're sharing about their lived experiences publicly. They've written down, they've worked with our facilitators to craft their stories into a script. And being engaged in music. I just came back from a week with researchers who are studying the impact of music on dementia, and it's just phenomenal. We can't underestimate the role and the power of music in our lives. And Olivia is a music therapist and a licensed creative arts therapist, and we can't wait to build out our music offerings at Caring Kind. But identifying, getting your what music matters to you, and getting that situated in a way that we can, that you can engage with your own personal, meaningful music on a regular basis. And then, connecting with peers, as I've said. So here's Michael. I told you about him earlier. And this is something that, Michael shared with us, about his thoughts about what's been helpful for him as he's navigating his journey. He says, I desperately needed to meet others going through what I was and truly deeply getting what life with Alzheimer's actually feels like. Not like my dear and loving family and friends who so want to take care of me and do so in many vitally important ways, but they cannot actually walk in my shoes. Finding that peer support has been beyond helpful because this is an isolating illness and being with others is comforting and inspiring. What he says is, this is something that I didn't know that I needed it until I actually got it. And then I realized how important it was. So I put that out there for encouragement. And so we've got, social and community engagement programs that we offer at Caring Kind that are open, for folks to be involved. Our Connect to Culture programs, we've got Connect to Sports with the baseball program. We have 360 meetups. And we're building out more and more of these. And whether they're connecting with us or connecting, with other resources in the city, the key is to do something that's meaningful for you, and to keep socially and engaged. Like I said, our To Whom I May Concern program, this one is differently. People don't generally come get involved with us and then start, jump right into To Whom I May Concern. But all of these folks kind of started in other programs. And one of these people in particular was a gentleman that was in denial about his situation. And I think after about 9 months of working, being in groups with other people, he started to talk about his experience and then share them. And this program, Olivia and Rochelle, who are on the call, did this group recently, and you can watch these videos on our website. So they met with these 4 individuals, and the question is, what's it like to live with dementia? What's it like? And they share about their experiences of getting diagnosed and what it's been like with their families and who they told and who they didn't tell and what that experience was like. And and, you know, what brings them meaning and joy and what's hard and what's humorous and how do you, you know, how do you adapt? And all of that's crafted into a script, which then they read out in a public gathering. So we had probably 80 people that came to this performance that was just about a month ago now, and they shared their experience. And my takeaway with this, particularly with the gentleman who was, you know, in denial early on, is I think what I came to realize is that he couldn't formulate his words on his own to talk about his experience. But with the help of his peers and, you know, our staff, when he was actually reading his love letter to his wife and was talking to his son about the fact that they hadn't really talked about his diagnosis, you know, we had created the space for him to get the words in a form that he could then get them out. And so this is an incredible program, and I encourage you all to go to the website and watch the videos there. I mentioned our cognitive stimulation therapy program, and so this is a 8-week program that runs twice a week for 8 weeks, and it's really about helping people to generate new thoughts, ideas, opinions. You know, sharing your opinion on something doesn't require memory. And so people can engage in meaningful conversation and have ideas and share and be involved in a very communicative way, in spite of the fact that they're living with Alzheimer's disease or another form of dementia. And this program has been shown to actually improve cognition, you know, their people's thinking abilities, their moods, their social engagement, and we see it happen. This is really, you know, we've got testimonials from family members and from people who participated in this group about the real value of the groups. So that's cognitive stimulation therapy, and when the 8 weeks is done, then people continue on once a week for as long as they want, and as long as, you know, it's the right fit for them. And then this program, Journey Together, this one is really more of it's kind of a support. It's a supportive group where people are talking about what they're going through and learning about what the brain changes are, what it's like, how you actually live with this in a small facilitated group. And then there's actually, we have the complement of this called Partnering Together for family partners. That's 10 sessions where where family members are learning about what's your story and how are you grieving and what are the emotions and how are you processing that, and a lot of the stuff that we've talked about today is covered in that group. And then we have another program that's called Make It Matter, which is really about what are some practical ways that people can get involved to make a difference, on whether that's, you know, writing letters to legislators, or participating in research, or advocating in some way, or doing kind of public talks and education with us. And I'm going to wrap up here now. So in this book, you know, the Pathways to Wellbeing, you know, there's lots of ideas about how to support your well-being. And again, you'll see similar themes here as the ones I've already shared, you know, staying connected, finding fun and interesting things to do and to stay engaged, limiting stress and stressful experiences, eating and drinking healthy, getting restorative sleep, being physically active, keeping your spirits up. So those themes you can see, you know, over and over again are coming through, and they're not, you know, these aren't my words. The reason why I'm bringing these resources forward is because I can say these things, but here's some actual resources that have been created by people living with these experiences who are talking about how they've moved into a place of living with Alzheimer's and dementia and coming to a place of a more hopeful day-to-day experience. In one of the bias force in the grief and loss book, this list of questions is included, which is really kind of a conversations starter. And I apologize, this is small, but we'll send these out to you. But I think this is these are good questions for people to think about And they're good questions to kind of bring forward to have a discussion about. So what are you feeling? What do you fear? Where do you feel your grief? When do you feel your grief? What do you need others to know about what you're feeling? Who can you talk to openly, honestly about your feelings? What do you need? How can others support you? How can you express your grief in a way that's meaningful for you? What aspirations do you have? How can you support others as they work through their grief? How can you be truly present for others experiencing grief? And how can you support others in achieving their aspirations? And we can add to this list of questions, but hopefully this gives you a taste of beginning to open conversations about how people are feeling and what they're experiencing. A key piece of the brain that I didn't talk about is a small little structure called the amygdala. And it's the emotional center of the brain. It's small little almond that largely stays intact all the way through people's diseases until the end. And so learning how to speak and relate on an emotional level will set you up for the best way of having a relationship on both sides of the equation, whether you're living with dementia or whether you're loving someone or supporting somebody who's living with dementia. Being able to learn how to identify their emotional needs and speak to their emotional needs and meet their emotional needs is how you're going to relate when cognition changes, emotion lasts. Next steps. I hope I've given you a lot of things to think about. I would say take a look at the resources for sure that, and we're happy to, again, push those out to you all. This is a lot of information for kind of an entry level talk, and we could do a deep dive in, many of these areas. And the way to do that is to start a conversation with us. And so if you're not already engaged with us at Caring Kind, kind of with one of our staff, please, here's a QR code. You can snap it with your phone. You can email the helpline. You can go to our website. We have a referral form there. You can refer yourself. You can go to this page, contact us, and go down and check the box that says, I want to schedule an appointment, and times will come up, and you can just have a 30-minute conversation with one of our team to learn. We can learn a bit more about you and your situation, and you can learn more about how we might partner with you to meet your needs. And so there's our website, and that's all, you've kind of got all of our information, and Olivia's put that information in the chat as well. So I'm conscious it's 7:30. We've been going for a long time here. But I'm happy to take, a few questions if anybody's got questions for kind of the general group. And if you have, more one-on-one questions, you can go to our website and schedule an appointment with one of our dementia specialists. But yes, Kathleen, I see your hand up there.
I was just, at one point, we were talking about, again, this is from the perspective of someone watching rather than living, allowing people to live their lives fully, yet making sure that there are safeguards. Where are some resources on the kinds of, and I'm sure the safeguards are dependent on the symptoms, but what are the kinds of things that we can do that will help us feel like it's okay to let everybody go out and explore an adventure, and yet actually have safety and safeguards?
Okay. So I would say the Tips and Strategies book, and then also the Pathways to Wellbeing, both of those have very practical and tactical resources involved. And again, our team, we have a one-on-one program where we can work with you, directly to talk about your particular situation and what your particular needs are. But you know, it's all about, again, what are the person's strengths, and quite honestly, it has to do with calculated risk, right? We all live with a level of calculated risk in our lives. And when you are diagnosed with dementia, there's kind of now a new level of calculated risk. And so we want to, you know, be honest and think about those things. But you don't suddenly step out of calculated risk, or you don't just suddenly step into calculated risk when you get a diagnosis. We're all living with calculated risk and making choices on a daily basis about how risk tolerant we are. You know, so I ride the subway. There's a risk that's inherent with that. You know, do I wear a mask when I wear the, you know, do I ride the subway, you know, after a certain hour in the evening? Yes or no? You know, at what point do you take an Uber? And those kinds of things. And things like, you know, watches that have GPS locators, or sharing your location services with something. So there are some very practical, you know, tools that people can use, you know, setting up check-in types of systems, especially if somebody's living alone. What do those things look like?
Thank you.
Anybody else? Hold on, I think you're muted there. I'm sorry, Jay Inhan. I don't know what your first.
Okay. Can you hear me now? Can you hear me now?
Yes, sir.
Okay, thank you. At what point, it seems to me there are phases or stages that people go through with dementia. For the early phase, they're showing symptoms, but they're in a sort of a state of denial, and they're finding reasons for it. They're outside of dementia. They're saying, "Oh, it's just old age, you know, it's just this, it's just that," and it'll pass. And they go from that stage to a point where they say, "Yes, I do have a problem, and I need to be aware of the problem and do what I can," like joining Caring Kind, for example, and going past that to a stage where they're just kind of out of it. They don't know that they have a problem, but they do, and it's getting worse. I'm trying to put a timeline into this. I know it's difficult. Everybody's going to be different, but I'm just wondering if you might have a thought on that.
Yeah, I'm hearing a couple things in your question there. One is, you know, people's abilities change over time, and what people are typically asking is like, okay, this goes back to your question too, Kathleen. At what point do we need to intervene more intentionally, because people's cognition is changing, and that does have risk is going up? And I will tell you, this is where, you know, as an occupational therapist, you know, I have kind of very clear guidelines professionally. At what point do people need assistance? And at what point, you know, are people okay to be independent living at home alone? And at what point do people need, you know, kind of 24-hour or some, you know, is someone checking in remotely, you know, or on an intermittent basis, or does somebody need to be kind of there all the time? And there are lines there, and there are certain functional things that we look for. And it has to do with how independent people are, especially in their things of daily living. And so, for example, if someone is not recognizing that there's an expiration date on food, that's a you know, kind of a safety and a judgment call. And so if I go into someone's home and I open up the refrigerator and there's food in there that's expired, you know, you can imagine something like, you know, chicken or even milk, or something that's now the person is at risk because they aren't recognizing this very practical thing. That's when, you know, we begin to add in more levels of support and checks to make sure that a person is, you know, able to function safely. And typically what happens is, you know, people, their ability to understand and to problem solve changes over time. And that correlates to their ability to do things like follow a recipe, or to prepare a meal, or even to get dressed, to recognize what the weather is outside and to choose clothes appropriately for the weather. To recognize that, it's the winter now, and so I need to be wearing winter clothes, or the rain is coming, and so therefore I need to be taking my umbrella. So those kinds of decisions, we can see that if a person isn't recognizing those things, then the probability of them not recognizing that the stove is on and the gas is going, there's a correlation there. So we can begin to see people's functional changes give us a clue into what's happening in their brain, and at what point does safety really require a different level of support. And I'm happy to talk more about that, or our team can talk more about the specifics of where those lines are.
Yeah, very good. I appreciate your explanation. Thank you.
Sure. Alexander, yeah.
Good evening. Thank you so much for this wealth of knowledge. It was a great presentation. So I want to thank you for, again, your time and everyone involved who put this together. I really appreciate this. So I am coming from the perspective of a caregiver, a recent caregiver for two family members simultaneously. So it is a lot going on in addition to my robust career, et cetera. So it's just a life curveball. So my question to you is, I know you have a therapist background. Are you still active? And because I think that's what I need for this family member. They just need new perspective. Like, we had a therapist and she was great, but I need someone who is very detailed oriented and has dementia as a niche. So that's why I wanted to ask and see if you are accepting new patients. If so, what forms of payments do you accept? I spoke to someone else at Caring Kind today. I believe her name is Carolyn. She was very informative. She gave me some information, 3 emails I signed up for, additional programs that you have coming up in early June. So I'm looking forward to that. And so that's my question.
Sure. So I personally am not in practice, although I empower my role is to empower as many people on my teams to replicate the work that I do. And so I think there's practical work that we do with family members. And then if somebody needs kind of psychotherapy and a different level, a higher level of counseling where kind of insurance and payment would be involved, we have, some partners that we recommend with that will go down that clinical path with people. But a lot of times the work that, there's a lot of work that we can actually do. That's, everything that we do is actually free of charge, for the families that we serve. And so I would say, again, if, start with kind of a one-on-one conversation with one of the members of our team. And so we can, again, begin to kind of guide and direct you, more intentionally and specifically. And I feel your pain. You're like, welcome. I want to say, welcome to my world, or, you're in good company, because there are a lot of adult children who are caring for both parents, sometimes step parents, kind of simultaneously. And it's hard to navigate that. One thing that I didn't say that I'll say now, because you opened the door, is it takes a team, and you hear that it takes a village, but it really does take a team to provide long-term care and support for people. And so one of the things that we identify, encourage people to do early on is to start getting people involved in your care, greater, life situation.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And one last thing, you shared a slide that was very hopeful, because I was told the opposite. Like, when you are recently diagnosed, I was just told that it's irreversible, but you just showed a slide that said if you catch it early enough, it is reversible. So which one is it?
It's not, dementia is not completely reversible. If you actually have the underlying pathology and you've been fully diagnosed, then, you know, these are brain changes and brain function that don't go away. There are ways that we can improve. You know, we can improve, what I say is we can maximize people's existing abilities, what's retained, we can maximize those, we can optimize those, we can compensate for the areas that are struggling by beefing up other areas. So we can work with people to have a rich and full and meaningful life. But just like the person who has a spinal cord injury and has to use a wheelchair, we're not reversing that spinal cord injury. We're figuring out how to support that person to have the best life they can and to engage in as many things as are meaningful to them in their wheelchair.
Understood. Thanks again. Appreciate it.
I'm gonna wrap us up here. Thank you all for hanging in there. I realize again, you know, this has been a lot of information. Hopefully that it was helpful for you all, and you know, we're happy to go to the next level with any of you and all of you and the friends that you will encounter and the family members that you will encounter in your future, who will probably also be impacted by this in one way or another. But it's great to have to be with you and to have you. And we look forward to connecting with you on the next chapter. So thanks, everybody.
Thank you, Stephanie, very much. On behalf of Caring Kind, we hope to see you again at our next monthly Monday night educational meeting. And if you haven't seen, you can certainly contact us via the helpline, or we'll make sure that, you know, through this venue, you can get on that mailing list so you can see what we're doing.
And please complete this survey for us, because it really does give us good feedback about what we're doing and if on point or not.
It was very helpful.
Great.
One of which my wife was saying, this is a doom and gloom, but in the course of the presentation, that changed. So where there's a will, there's a way type of thing. You know?
It's true. It's true. I'm glad you had that feeling.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Thank you.
Night, everybody.
Good night.
You.